Hello and welcome to Empires of Aether, the next great. Here we are with an update in September of 2023. It's been over 2 years in the making of this game, and Sun, the 16th, and as it currently stands, the final element that I have envisioned for this game with a symmetrical 4 sets of 4, with each element having play with the other 3 in their own set. And of course, now it brings about the possibilities of how do we make these elements within one set interact with others. So the focus of the game now is just balance, balance, balance. Maybe new content not coming out in droves the way that we'd like to, even though that's one of my favorite things about doing this, is coming out with some new and fun creative things to try to shake up the meta. I think today we're going to be pretty happy with that. I think the meta will be shaken up. Let's go into a couple of nerfs before we show in a few new things that we're going to try and see how it shakes it up. And hey, let's get this competitive scene back up and running. Gosh, I miss the elements, man. I know you do too. Let me know when you're hungry to play. Throw down in the comments what elements are you looking to see, what elements are you excited to test now that all these new things have really been thrown in and haven't really been tested. New bosses, new lines of abilities. Let's get cracking. And let's start with what I believe is one of the most deplorable things ever integrated into this game, and that's Moon. If you've played with me, you know that just on principle, if there is a single forest within 3 tiles of any corner of the board, I ban Moon. Moon is the most broken element in the game, and of course it's because of their tier 2 mechanic, which yes, it's the most unique aspect about them, but the fact that if you're starting with 1616 or 2020 Moon and you've got a forest within reach, that you are able to go to tier 2 on the same timeline as other elements, the only counter was to get pretty strong advantage cards and just go and attack them with something like Glacier or Lightning and Fire, and those elements have already been dominant in other stretches, so I don't want that to be the only counter, but even then, it still felt like you had to be lucky to stop them, because they didn't have to pay the direct resources to go to tier 2, and they were still the most powerful on the board because they had the 4 armies there. So yes, that's what makes them unique, it's also what makes them broken. And so I'm nerfing the crap out of them. I'm nerfing the absolute crap out of them. And there's mainly 2 things I'm doing here. Forests were too powerful, and the ability to train a full army in tier 1 was too powerful with this nation. The other thing that was incredibly powerful was that stupid waning ability. Yeah, you might think this is too much of a nerf, that I'm making this ability useless. I definitely still think it has its merits, but waning made it to where there was no drawback from taking any early game risks. You could go for a boss when you had 2 or 3 armies, lose, and get full return on your investment, and go to tier 2 the next turn still. There's no sacrifice there. You could have the only counter be the aggression, go to defend, and then activate waning, and have no drawback on your timeline, and you would still hit tier 2 on turn 3, maximum of turn 4. And if you were a complete fool, you weren't running those numbers to see when you were going tier 2. That being said, we don't want to nerf an element so far into the ground that it never gets played again. Cough, cough, arcane. Cough, cough, blood. Cough, cough. I'm sure you can think of something else maybe if I nerfed your favorite element. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to do the element's will, okay? I am merely the conduit by which Aether communes, okay? I think we put in some cool abilities here. Okay, in fact, Spreading the Curse might be my favorite tier 2 of all time. Let's start with the tier 1 that is going to replace Waning that is gone. And yes, we want to add more Moon stuff here. Shapeshifter is going to allow you to position your units on a boss tile without actually fighting them. How often do we see people stock up on the short side of the map, put all their defenses on that short side tile that is usually the midway point, knowing that the boss is effectively another defensive fortification by which your opponent has to go around or through? Well, those times are over. Moon, as they are shapeshifters themselves, are able to sweet-talk the bosses into letting them hang out for a while. Chill out, relax, and then pounce on you the following turn using their tile as a lovely gathering point. Imagine the general moving onto a boss tile on the short side, rallying Hal, bringing an army to him, and then attacking you from behind your defenses. That's juicy. Keen Smell is going to be a sort of Air's own tempo tier 1, draw 2 advantage cards the rest of the turn. It's the lightning passive folded into the rest of the game. Very powerful, especially with equipment now in the game. But my favorite ability added to them is Spreading the Curse. As the whole curse of the werewolf, right, morphing and you're ostracized and you're cast out from society. It's a curse to be so strong. And so naturally, when you bite someone, you spread it. So upon winning a battle involving your general, this ability will take the place of that opponent's one of their tier 2 abilities. And the cycle continues. Because then they're part werewolf. And then when their general goes and battles someone else, they'll go and spread the curse to someone else. My dream is to see 4 different tier 2 abilities consumed by spreading the curse. How juicy is that? How juicy is that? I think it sounds fun. Don't you? I think it sounds really fun. Let's move on. I think we've done enough punishment to the moon mains out there. Sorry, Green. Sand. Tusken Raider Sand. I mean, how can we not go for it? Right? All the memes and the punchlines and the puns were in the initial abilities for Sand. It's my Tusken Raider impression. And of course, we've got more Anakin lines here, and not just the men. And of course, our Jawas down here try to make a play on the equipment, right? When we put new mechanics in the game, you want the elements to interact with them. You don't want it to be to where just everyone interacts with them in the same way. You want it to be specific to whatever element you're working with. Before this was even tested, right? 2 Desert Sand, I still contend, is the strongest setup you can ever have in a corner. And then people are hesitant to play 1 Desert Sand. This was going to make them so powerful. And so I changed it to where this ability is only active once we are in Tier 1. I do see there being a possibility of playing a Tier 1 aggro-heavy Sand, in which you're really just playing on the short side going at him. We've got this Raider, it's in the name ability, to just give us that stacking, attacking value bonus as we're getting closer and closer to the nation's capital. I definitely see the potential being there still, but if we're able to effectively treat deserts as merpeople, but Sand is making deserts everywhere they go. So they would have merpeople at every tile they touch because they've got the make 1 desert in Tier 1, they've got the make double desert in Tier 2. They would have Sand everywhere, and they would have all these discounted soldiers moving everywhere at cheapened values and just being able to attack a lot of things. And that seems a little dangerous to me. So I went ahead and nerfed it before it even got played. Crazy. But we've done that before, I promise. Now, we have 16 elements in the game. Perfect harmony. We know the rock, paper, scissors effect that happens on every single nation's card, right? At the bottom of Moon, we've got a +5 bonus against Arcane. I want it to be to where each element has a friend and foe, a friendly matchup and negative matchup in each set. And so I've made a sort of diagram that makes sense to me. There's a couple of them that I don't like the interactions that ended up, but I feel like this makes the most sense after playing around with it for a bit. Like, fire shouldn't only counter air. Fire has abilities that counter glacier. They melt the heck out of glacier. So why don't they counter them in combat as well? Why is it just magma, right? Fire can burn down trees. They've got abilities to interact with forests and stuff, but because nature was in a different set, there was no interaction there. Now there is. I'll tell you the one that really grinds my gears right now, and if you got another way to position it, please let me know, and we'll throw it in there, is I want lightning to counter water, right? Pretty obvious counter there, but the way the things were shaken out, it put water and lightning in the same section, which kind of threw things off a little bit, but I think by and large, this does make sense. You've got the more memey elements like umami that really, where's their place? Like, maybe fire could burn the food over time. But really, I think poison should be poisoning the food, absolutely making it inedible. That one makes sense, right? I don't think there's any arguments there. But then the other thing is, my dream is to make these bonuses more relevant to the game. That +5 really doesn't matter so much. So I think it would be cool to test if the element you counter in your set was actually a counter. What if when fire counters air, it's not just +5? What if it's +10? What if the counter was bigger? So I think the element that counters you in your own set, we're going to test it for at least the next few games, few tables to see how it plays out. The element you counter in your own set, you'll have a +10 advantage on, and then elements in the other sets that you counter, you'll have a +5 advantage on. And so we would kind of set this up with fire. Whatever's directly beneath you, you counter all of them. So fire is going to have +5 on glacier, nature, and blood, but +10 against air here. That's what I'd like to test, just to see if there's more counterplay. Are we still picking the same 8 elements, or are we going for more counterplay type setups? The last thing that we're going to do in the meantime, right, as we're trying to balance, is I want these alternative lines of abilities more utilized. And monuments were, I think, one of the best ideas we've integrated into the game without much success of actually integrating it into the game. They're one of my favorite mechanics. So instead of having to pay 10 plus BM for most of these, which most elements simply can't do, especially if you're in the 10-10 or 13-13 position, when you buy the star tile, if you hold off on buying the star tile until you are tier 2, the monument will automatically be placed. So yes, it is this powerful tier 2 ability, this powerful tier 2 checkpoint, but remember, it's conditional. If you lose that star tile, it's gone. It's not like your other tier 2 abilities that you, yes, have it immediately, but you can use it at no cost to you, but also you can't lose it. So, monuments, this might be too drastic of a change, but we're making all of them free. Let's see what happens. I definitely see some scary things happening, but like Star Tile Fire, I think should be very viable. And so this is, yes, borrowing from the new Suns tiering up mechanic of they tier up by going or purchasing a Star Tile. This is kind of borrowing from them, but it's going to make Blood and Arcane, elements like that have kind of fallen to the wayside, so much more viable. Magma has kind of struggled as of late. There's not even a Lightning Monument yet because Lightning has dominated in every facet of the game. Do I think that Glacier should be leaning towards their Monument? Not all the time, but I definitely think it should have its value, it should have its place. And so it's going to make alternative playstyles for a lot of these elements that you guys have come to love and you've refined and you've made as efficient as possible, not so one-dimensional. Right? Let's keep the game exciting. No 2 games are the same. That's what we want to do. And so Moon, we're going to get its monument going. Lightning will get its monument going soon too. And hopefully we'll integrate some of the newer abilities with Lightning, with the batteries, the bolts, and the volts with that. The one that I do see that is scary here is Nature. If Nature is able to get its Preserving the Wildlife where only they can attack boss tiles, Nature's been kind of weak though. Yes, it gets an insta-ban whenever there's 3 forests in one corner, but by and large, Nature has not been too successful in the competitive scene. Is that because people are always playing it incorrectly? I don't know. We'll have to take a look at it some more here in the near future. But I definitely see this being a very, very powerful play, especially if you've got more aggro matchups, Lightning and Fire and Poison that are really, really exceptionally good at taking down bosses. Nature's going to put that to a halt. Very interesting there. One Desert Sand might be more valuable with the Great Sphinx. So let's see what you guys do with it. Let's see what I do with it. Because, you know, I'm always cooking. Speaking of cooking, Umami would be stronger because of that. Don't have to spend food to get that pot down. Economic Water is way more viable with Trade Center going immediately down. Protecting that center of the board because no one can attack it until Tier 3. Lots of very interesting interactions here. And then lastly, we all know that abilities have scaled up in their power, right? As of right now, there's Fire with 3 abilities in one in the little baby Phoenix that you can take in Tier 1. So yes, some abilities have been power crept out of existence. Hopefully in the next couple of patches, we'll be bringing those abilities up so that they once again have viability. Wielding Mjolnir was never viable. But this is just one example of an ability that has always stood out to me, but is also like it's a duh ability. Like, how do we not include Mjolnir into the lore that is Lightning, right? But I looked deeper into the lore of Mjolnir, and it was used to kill monsters. Well, monsters, of course, are intrinsic to so many different elements, win conditions, and Lightning is no exception to that. So, by discarding 2 advantage cards instead of spending your precious BM and getting just a paltry +5 bonus on your general, you're going to be able to decrease a boss's health by 30 whenever you attack it. Very interesting mechanic. You might be wondering to yourself, does Lightning need any buffs? No, absolutely not. But also, are you going to take this over the other 3 abilities that have become so firmly structured into the meta that is Lightning, that you're going to go for wielding Mjolnir? Can you get the value out of it? That's the question. That's the question. As always, this has been Empires of Aether, the next great. We'll see you at the next table.